Older generations of Reddit, who were the I don't use computers people of your time? My grandpa used to tell me that he was basically set for life because he learned to read and write. Mass illiteracy wasn't as long ago as we like to think. Digital clocks are lazy. My school has to hold an assembly for the 5th graders every year who can't read analog clocks cause they can't afford to replace all the clocks in the middle high school building. Edit. This comment quadrupled my total karma and it's just me complaining about my school, wow. My grandfather refused to get a VCR. But not because he was a Luddite. VCRs were all made in Japan and he had fought in the Pacific in World War II, so he refused to buy anything Japanese. Interesting side fact, this is why Nissan originally started selling cars as Datsun. They figured there was going to be a lot of bitter vets who remember Nissan making war materials. Did Volkswagen ever have the same problem? They did for a bit. The brand got passed around a bunch before they started production. It was even going to be given to Ford for free, and they declined. It was offered to a bunch of different English companies, they declined. So it was given back to Germany, under supervision. It might have helped that they didn't actually make that many before all the factories started churning out war stuffs. Seriously, the very first assembly plant opened in 38, and war started in 39. Not a ton of time spent making bugs. They only made 210 before shutting down. Civilian bugs only started happening in the late 40s, and only boomed in popularity in the mid-60s-ish, 20 years after the war ended, and during an entirely different war, so I imagine for some, it was easy to ignore the German aspect. Bugs were put into production again so the Allies would have something to travel in around Germany. VW was one of the few companies that were exempt from strict limits on materials like iron steel after World War II as long as they only made stuff for the Allies to start with. In 1949, VW stood for 45% of all of Germany's GNP though, so the whole bug business and was a core key for the early rebuild effort of Germany post-war. My grandmother didn't like to use the remote control for her television, because she was afraid it would break somehow and function as a laser dangerous enough to set things on fire. My grandmother complained about remote controls for TVs because it would promote people being lazy. Because apparently watching TV in the first place is a rigorous activity. Modern day, I've had people tell me using a voice-activated light system in my house is lazy because there's something to be said for getting up to turn on a light. Like what, it builds character to flip a switch? I'll take my space house thanks. The only reason I haven't got voice-activated lights is because, right now, it would be spending money on a problem that doesn't exist. Maybe in the future when my house is more connected. My grandparents were the first people to have a television in their neck of the woods, rural NC in the 1950s. A big deal back then. Grandma told a story how when riding on a bus back from work one day, and a couple of her neighbors were on there too. They were talking about how the Blakeburn has got one of them fancy TVs. Saying how it was an evil thing and would simply bad of them to buy one and that they, the neighbors, were wise enough never to get one of course. They knew my grandmother was on the bus with them, as they said it really loud so she would hear them. Petty jealousy from them made my grandma run off the bus in tears. Story goes that Grandpa, a mechanic who was doing well enough they could buy a TV, was so livid that he refused to work on these neighbors' vehicles for decades. He was the only mechanic around for almost 20 miles, which then was an hour drive from anywhere else. Edit 1, wanting to stay semi-anonymous, Western NC, near Boone. Edit 2, my first silver. Thank you stranger. Justice served. Color TV. When they became common in the mid-60s, a lot of older people believed they emitted harmful rays. When Mom finally got one circa 1972, it was kept in her bedroom and we were ushered in to watch it only on special occasions. And we had to sit at least 10 feet away. When I was little, my mother would have us evacuate the kitchen whenever she used the microwave. Lamau, your use of the word evacuate makes me imagine your mother doing drills with you and your family on proper evacuation procedure. Sadly, you're not far off. You know, even today people still believe those microwaves find their way through the oven. They don't. Those are electromagnetic waves with such long wavelengths they can't get past through the metallic grid you see in front. If it wasn't so, yeah, they surely would have enough energy to cause serious damage to body tissue. So what I'm getting from this comment is that it's okay to stand an inch away and watch my popcorn pop. Sweet, thanks. Edit. Aw 3 my first gold. Thank you kind stranger, I hope you had a good Monday smile. In fact, as long as you're not inside the oven, you are totally safe indeed. I actually had a coworker basically yell at me one day because I was standing too close to the microwave and asked if I was trying to get cancer. She was a generally smart lady, but this really showed me that even pretty smart people have at least a few things they believe without having any basis in fact. There are really many types of electromagnetic radiation. Some are ionizing, like UV, but microwaves actually just heat things up. If you were to get in contact with a great amount of microwaves, which you are not standing in front of the oven, you'd really be cooked to death. My granddad still believes that 15 is the age of adulthood, that schooling isn't necessary beyond that point. She grew up in a time when literacy wasn't a given. With a bachelor's degree and my very mediocre Spanish, I would have killed it in 1920. For all of about 8 years. Well, now I'm greatly depressed. Some people still had outdoor toilets and were laughing at those who had them installed inside because they are shitting their own houses. I lived on a homestead for a little while. I had an outdoor pit privy toilet. I hand-carved the toilet seat myself. Sometimes I miss watching the sunset while taking a dump. It was way better than being stuck in a small room reading Reddit on my phone. Unless it was raining. Wiping while holding an umbrella is trickier than it looks. No outhouse with a crescent moon carved in the door? My grandmother is 89. When she was a kid, she had an uncle who hated cars. He called them machines and refused to drive one. It could have been job security though, her whole family worked for the railroad. In all fairness, cars are machines. Then again, so are trains. Fun fact. The Russian word for car is machina. My grandmother is 97 and told me about people who would refuse to get air conditioning or drink sodas, because they the devil's work. She grew up on a farm in a 2-room house with 11 family members living in that house. She always had sodas and the AC rocking and rolling all summer. My grandma is 79 and refuses to turn on her AC for religious and it's gonna make mold grow everywhere reasons. I swear she's going to die of heat stroke one summer, but veiled. Edit, since I'm getting a bazillion questions about this. She's into some sort of hardcore sub-Christian Catholic cult. It's not Amish, Mormon or the JW, too minor so I forgot the name. Tech is not forbidden per se in their thing, but it's not liked at all by their thing. It's like everything bad that's happening to Canada comes from soulless new tech and immigrants. The whole thing is weird and doesn't make sense to atheist software engineering student me, so I'd have trouble explaining more. When I was a kid, we had to go around in the summer and check to make sure the older neighbors' ox were on and working so they wouldn't die of heat stroke. That's some good neighborliness. My dad once told me a story about his grandmother refusing to fly in planes because she didn't want to get her hair all messed up from the wind. I'm picturing her flying with Red Bear and Snoopy as the pilot. Honey, I promise your hair won't get messed up from the wind. Plops leather bomber hat on her head. Back in the 80s, I knew an old lady who used one of those really old toasters that could only toast one side of the bread at a time. As a present, we went out and bought her a modern pop-up toaster, but she wouldn't use it. She preferred to use her old one. I could see if she had one of those rad Sunbeam Radiant toasters, which in many ways are superior to any toaster on the market today, but this is just a fire waiting to happen. I see you also have watched that Technology Connections video. When remote control TVs came out, I suggested that my father buy one, and he said, "It will be a cold day in hell when I'm too lazy to tell one of you boys to get up and change the channel." It was such an amazing sentence that I committed it to memory, and I still remember it word for word 50 years later. From his point of view, he already had remote control TV. Why should he pay extra to have it automated? Exactly. He would have had us act out Game of Thrones before getting a subscription to HBO.